Hi ladies, Jennie Steed here with Paradigm Life. I am your wealth strategist and tax therapist. I want to help you learn how you can get a divorce from the IRS, eliminate taxes, invest in yourself, and retire confidently. I do that with a strategy called the Perpetual Wealth Strategy. The core of that strategy uses investment grade whole life insurance contracts to both accelerate the growth of your savings and to protect against loss. And when structured properly, this will be the foundation from which all of your financial decisions stem from. If you'd like to learn more, you can find me at jenniesteed.com. You can download a copy of our book, Heads I Win, Tails You Lose, A Financial Strategy to Reignite the American Dream, by Patrick Donahoe, the founder and CEO here at Paradigm Life. So enjoy. So we're going to talk about Jane. Of course, that's not her real name, but we're going to use Jane for her name. So this case study we're going to talk about here today, we're going to do a little education first, but then we'll get into our case study. But again, our core strategy uses investment grade insurance contracts. So I want to be super clear about that. Again, we want to help you accelerate the growth of your savings and to protect against loss. So I'm going to use some assumptions that we used with Jane, and those are obviously female, but she's 40 years old. She's saving about $20,000 per year, and she knows that she needs flexibility because she has a family. She's looking at that for about 30 years. She's in about a 35% tax rate. So we're going to use some savings account or accumulation strategies and then the insurance policy. So when we're looking at different ways to build cash reserves or equity, you have to look at 4 key characteristics. And those are: how safe is the asset, how liquid, what's the rate of return, and what are the tax consequences. So let's compare these different accounts. So with the savings, as you have all experienced, I'm sure you earn less than 1%, and those are taxed as earned. With qualified money, IRAs, 401ks, etc., how safe is that? Well, I guess it depends. How liquid? Probably not so much. Typically, you can't touch it until it's 59.5 without penalty, and that will be taxed as ordinary income when withdrawn. Then you have your home equity. Can you lose your money in a home equity? There's possibility. That is one of the benefits of owning real estate, is you build equity. But in the crash of 2008, 2009, then there was some pretty big losses. Stocks, can we lose value? Absolutely, but we can also have massive returns. How liquid is it? And we have to check to see where it's at as far as its performance. Okay, if the value drops. And then there's the life insurance. It's permanent dividend paying whole life insurance. In my opinion, there's no safer account because it's contractually guaranteed. Even your loans are guaranteed, they're collateralized, and they're highly liquid. So returns are determined by the dividend the carrier pays. So we use mutual insurance companies that have been in business for over 150 years. So these dividends can vary, but are guaranteed not to go below a certain number. So they become a part of your principal, never to be lost, and they are exempt from taxes. So again, getting a divorce from the IRS. So some interest basics. We either earn it or we pay it. The reason most Americans are still living paycheck to paycheck is they don't understand how interest rate works. So we're taught that there are 2 ways of creating capital for investing or for major purchases like cars, homes, vacations, and education. We can either save and pay cash or borrow from a bank. The problem is that either way, you're still financing everything you buy, and you're borrowing against your future income just to get back to zero. Let's go into that a little further. So let's look at these 3 different ways that we can possibly run our household spending and investing. So the first way is the typical American, which is a debtor borrowing to pay for large expenses. They typically don't have capital working for them because they can't save. But when expenses come up, they borrow again and again, slowly repay the loan using future income. They always pay interest, and they're always working to get back to zero. Then there's savers. The traditional way our parents and grandparents paid for expenses was to save their money. and also to raise capital for investment opportunities. And when an expense or an opportunity came up, they emptied their savings to pay for it, or they drained their tank and started over. In this comparison, they are no better off than the debtor. They're still at zero. The third way is to be a wealth creator. These are people who save as much as possible and they collateralize their wealth when they need to make big purchases or investments. This is what the wealthiest families in the US have done for generations. How does this work? All you're essentially doing is collateralizing the asset and taking out a loan against it. The idea is simple. You build up equity in the wealth maximization account or your whole life policy. It earns uninterrupted compound interest, and you can use the account to secure a loan for your next purchase or investment. So you might be thinking, won't this just make me a debtor? And the answer is no, not if you do it the right way. When the interest on your loan is the same as your interest rate you're earning on your savings, you'll still come out ahead because of uninterrupted compounding interest. When we meet one-on-one, I'll go into that further. So one of the secrets to the whole life insurance contracts is, some of these I'll share in a second, and not all policies are created equal. And obviously they don't perform the same. So the number one secret is to structure the contract properly to stuff in as much cash into the policy as possible, minimize expenses and charges that typically come with insurance. Secret number two is structure the contract properly to have unlimited access to use that money tax-free and reinvest it while it's still earning uninterrupted compounding interest. So where's the catch? There's actually three catches. I want to be super clear on them. Catch number one is qualifying for the insurance at a reasonable rate, which means you need to pass a medical exam. Catch number two is time, or the capitalization factor. You must put money in before you can borrow against its value or equity. Catch number three is the government limits how much you can put into each policy based on the underlying death benefit. So this means that in order to maximize each policy, you must also maximize the death benefit. So we're going to look at an accumulation strategy first, using a life insurance policy, and then a savings account for capital. Then we'll look at the same strategy, except we will add real estate. So this represents an actual policy projection for a 40-year-old female showing how cash value accumulates. So let's look at the downside first. So remember I told you about the capitalization factor. So what happens is there's about a 1-year lag before you have access to the full amount that you contributed in year one. But it actually starts to draw even by about year 6 plus. So right off the bat, this looks like a big hurdle to overcome. So for example, if we put in a $20,000 contribution, we have access to about $13,000 in cash value in year one. In the second year, or right here, and then in the second year, we have access to about $27,000 in cash value. So if we needed a $20,000 down payment, we wouldn't be able to get that till year 2. So by the 6th year, then we start to draw even, and this is where the equity starts to happen. A lot like real estate. It just doesn't happen immediately. So in the insurance accumulation, if we're just using accumulation at this point, let's compare accumulating capital using a savings account, a managed investment portfolio, and an insurance-based wealth maximization account. So first, let's look at the insurance accumulation strategy. So in a 30-year outcome, again, remember we're using a $20,000 per year savings. What we have is this gets paid into the policy, and over this time frame, we will have contributed, in this example, about $480,000. But our cash grows to be about $1.3 million over time. So the internal rate of return on our policies is about 5%. Now let's look at a savings account accumulation. So in a 30-year time frame, the interest rate needed to match the return is about 8.26% in a savings account. That means it needs to be liquid, needs to be accessible. So you'd need to get an 8.26% return every single year, see, every single year, to match the same $1.3 million in that savings account. And that is taxed as earned. So we have to kind of ask ourselves, if that's where we're saving our capital, can we get that consistently? Probably not. So then there's a managed investment account. So those typically have management fees, and for the most part, we don't love to turn our capital over for somebody else to manage. That's why we do what we do, building our own wealth. But we're going to save that $20,000 for the same time frame here. We're going to have a management fee because somebody else is doing this. But what they're going to have to do is get you a constant rate of return of 10.14% every single year during this time frame to get the same $1.3 million. So we have to ask, can we get that consistently in Wall Street? Probably not. So what we see here is the comparison of the three. So the policy has no tax rate. So we've removed the policy's cash value off of the IRS tax radar. And that is huge. There's no management fee. You end up with the $1.3 million in this example. In a savings account, if we were able to achieve this 8.26% because of taxes, that's a pretty big return we would need. And then in a managed investment account, we need 10.14%. So those are some pretty big hurdles to overcome. And, I always ask, does this surprise you, the differences? Okay. And one thing to notice is that the insurance policy includes a death benefit for the rest of your life that can get passed on to your heirs, a charity, wherever, tax-free. Okay, so the savings and managed accounts would have the added cost of a term policy in order to be equal. So that would increase the return required in order for them to be equal. Okay, now we're going to utilize real estate within this strategy. So we're going to look at a 20% down payment. We're going to rebuild the savings either in a savings account or the policy. So pay that back at a 10% of what we're making. 3% inflation in all of this. In the policy, there is a loan cost, and the savings account has a 0.25 interest. So we're going to look at paying back both of these at 5 years using the cash flow created from the real estate investment. Now, as I mentioned before, one of the downsides to the policy is you actually have to wait 1 year later. So it delays the utilization by up to a year. But let's compare the two strategies using these following assumptions. Okay, so real estate using its savings account. So in the first year, we've saved up, the $20,000, and we essentially borrow that from our savings account. And we reinvest the accumulation in our savings account because we want to continue to make purchases. We do this right here. All these are real estate purchases along the way. And reinvesting those over time to create more assets. What would happen is the savings account would have about $1.5 million in that savings account. So not so bad, okay? If we utilize the insurance account, we wait 1 year. So we wait until the second year in this example to borrow the $20,000. We reinvest the accumulation just like in the savings strategy. But because we're achieving uninterrupted compounding interest on the cash value of the policy, we end up with about $2.7 million. So, in this example, Jane continues to purchase properties as the money accumulates at approximately the same pace as the savings account, but ends up with nearly twice as much money. So that's pretty huge. So if we look at the differences between the two, same amount of money into the policy, reinvesting the profits from those real estate transactions, ending up with almost twice as much money. So about 2.7 is what Jane will end up with versus 1.5 if she just utilizes her savings account. So this is just something that stood out to me in the very beginning, was how effective this is and why it's been used by the wealthiest families for a very long time. The policies are very safe, especially compared to the FDIC and a savings account. So they've only got about 7% reserves to back your savings account. So you can check that out. One thing that's also pretty neat to know is that banks actually utilize these same types of policies as their tier one capital. So Wells Fargo, Bank of America has $21 billion of bank-owned life insurance as their tier one capital because they cover their top 30 to 35% executives. So it's pretty interesting that that's what banks are using. The insurance companies don't leverage. They buy cash flow dollar for dollar. So they've got sufficient cash to cover every claim in cash versus the FDIC only has about 7% on reserve. So you also have reinsurance and then the state guarantee fund. So a lot of my clients are utilizing their wealth maximization account, especially Jane. She actually stores her emergency fund, her steady growth, her rainy day, gets her emergency fund, really everything. And she's just learned a whole different way to be accountable for her money. So I hope this has been tremendously helpful for you. And you've learned a lot here. So I know this is something very different. Not a lot of people know about this, and it's just not mainstream. Hi ladies, Jennie Steed here, your tax therapist. I'd love to see you soon. Come see me at jenniesteed.com/WREN. You can download a copy of our new book, Heads I Win, Tails You Lose. Hope to see you soon.